Bob Dean.
Boy, that's a hard one to live up to, isn't it? Thank you, Ray. I always begin by having to tell you that I've got so much material I don't think I can get it all in this afternoon. I'll do the best I can to compact to what I believe are the most important issues. I have a reputation for being rather long-winded on this subject, and I admit to that. Because as Ray said, I have concluded a long time ago, frankly, that this is indeed, without the shadow of a doubt, the most important issue of our time, and I will hopefully try to explain that to you before the afternoon is over as to why I feel that way. Before I get into that part of it, I want to share a couple of comments with you here. I want you to understand some 4 words that I have lived with for the last 40 years. And you're all familiar with these words because you've all experienced them yourself. The first one is frustration. The second one is aggravation. The third one is anger. And the fourth one is outrage. And let me explain to you why those words are important to me before I get into the meat of my presentation. I am frustrated after 40 years of searching for the truth and 40 years of being laughed at and ridiculed by people who weren't curious enough to really seek the answers for themselves. I am aggravated at so-called scientists and experts who smugly and arrogantly snickered at ideas beyond their own vision and imagination and refused to see even that there would be a 21st, 22nd, and 23rd century science. I am angry at a national security system in this country that spends billions of your tax dollars covering up from you the greatest secret of our time. And I am outraged at a government who apparently believes that you can lie to all of the people, all of the time. And the fact that you're here is encouraging to me, because that proves that there are some of us that we will not allow them to lie to us all of the time. Now that I've vented my spleen on those 4 words, I feel a little better. Thank you. My presentation this afternoon is going to be basically in 3 parts, and I'm hoping we have the time. I'm going to share some things with you. Some things that I know for a fact, some things that I have seen, some things that I have participated in. And then I'm going to share with you my conclusions after well over 30 years of research as to what this means, what's really happening, why is it so important, and what is really taking place here. And then hopefully toward the end we'll have time for a few slides. I don't want to go through the whole set, but there are some I do insist on sharing with you. Now to begin, I like to begin with a quote from the first act of Hamlet, which I know all of you are familiar with, where the young prince says to his friend, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your philosophy dreams of." And I like to lead into that using that as a set piece there, to give you some thought. I like to follow that with a comment, a quote from a very famous British astronomer and scientist a number of years ago by the name of Haldane, who said repeatedly that the universe is not only stranger than we know, it is stranger than we can know. And I want you to think of that also, because that is exactly in line with some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you this afternoon. I believe it's also important to say something very clear here, particularly to those of you in the audience who are retired military. I would imagine a great many of you have served in the military in one time or another in your lives, and maybe a few of you are retired. And it's important that I explain this to you so you don't misunderstand where I'm coming from. In the process of my presentation this afternoon, I am indeed going to violate my national security oath several times. And I want you to understand, you old soldiers and sailors and airmen out there, that I am not doing this lightly, but I am doing it intentionally. And I am happy and pleased to violate my oath on this particular issue, because it is indeed the most important issue of our time. There are secrets that I still hold and secrets that I will carry to my grave. Sometimes there are secrets that need to be kept secret. But this particular issue is so important to you as citizens of this country and as citizens of the human race, members of the human race, and citizens of this planet, that there's nothing more important than that, and I purposely and intentionally violate my oath with a good feeling, because I believe that not only do you people have a need to know, you have a right to know, because you're the ones that are paying the bills. And I'm a believer in the constitutional system. I see the constitutional system being stomped upon. I see that document, which is so precious to us, being ignored. And the time has come for we, the people of this country, to reclaim our rights, reclaim our Constitution, and damn well force the government that we are supporting and paying the bills for to own up, fess up, and finally, after over 40 years, tell us the damn truth about this issue. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, and it's a good feeling. Thank you. It's also important that you understand who I am and where I came from and how I came to be here. I spent most of my adult life as a professional soldier. I spent 27 years on active duty in the United States Army. And for most of those years, I was in the infantry. I was in special operations, special assignments. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a fact that I have been places I should not have been, and I have done things I should not have done. But I served my country loyally, and I still believe in my country, and I love my country, and I love the Constitution. And that's frankly the primary reason I'm here. I've had assignments in Cambodia, North Vietnam, Laos, and a number of other places I won't go into. For all of those years, I considered to myself to be a rather hard-nosed, no-nonsense professional soldier, in the sense that if I couldn't see something, touch it, measure it, weigh it, bounce it, kick it, I didn't necessarily believe that it was real. I was not a New Age kind of person, and it's important that you understand that, because I'm going to be sounding a little bit New Age here before I finish this afternoon. But in 1963, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to one of the most major headquarters in the world at that time, a place called SHAPE, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, which was located just a few miles outside of Paris, France, at a little town called Roquencourt. At that time, I was fortunate enough to have above top secret clearance with the Army, and when I got to SHAPE, I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which is the highest that NATO has, was and still is, a cosmic top secret clearance. And as a result of having that clearance, I was assigned to the Operations Division at SHAPE headquarters, a place we called SHOC, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And I was pleased and honored to be able to work for an American four-star general by the name of Lyman Lemnitzer, who at that time was known as SACEUR, and that means the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Well, in 1963, when I arrived and began working my shifts in the Operations Center, I became aware of a study that was underway that had begun in 1961. Now, this study was brought about out of sheer necessity, because in the late 50s and early 60s, a number of events had been taking place in Central Europe that literally, in a number of cases, almost triggered World War III. Many of you will remember that in those years, during the Cold War years, we and the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact were facing each other down across the Iron Curtain there. Both sides were armed to the teeth. Not only did we have enormous amounts of conventional weaponry and capability, but both sides had atomic capability. And literally our fingers on both sides, the Warsaw Pact and NATO, were just poised above the buttons. It was a tense time. It was a frightening time. And it's a tension in time that will live with me until the day I die. Thank God we did avoid the war. We came very close a couple of times. Interestingly enough, in the late 50s and early 60s, events began to occur where large numbers of large circular metallic disc-shaped objects flying in formation would come out of the Soviet zone, out of the east, over the Warsaw Pact area, flying over Central Europe, Germany, France, the English Channel, and usually turning north over the English Channel and the southern coast of England. And these objects would disappear off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. This had happened half a dozen times. Actually more. The objects were at an extremely high altitude. They were very large, and they were flying very fast. And it was very, very clear that they were under some kind of intelligent control. Now, for a long time, the Soviets thought these objects belonged to us, and for a while we thought they might have belonged to the Soviets. Later, we were both to find out that none of us owned these objects. We couldn't match their speed, we couldn't match their altitude, we couldn't match their behavior, the capability they had to stop on a dime and do high-speed, right-angle turns. And these things were almost playful in some cases, where they would play games with our interceptors that we would send up. And they teased some of our pilots to the point that these kids were getting very, very frustrated, almost ready to arm their guns and take a shot at them. Thank God they didn't. Now, the Supreme Deputy Allied Commander of Europe at that time was a British Air Marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike. A brilliant gentleman, one of the finest people I've ever met. And Sir Thomas was General Lemnitzer's deputy commander. And Sir Thomas Pike was frankly getting frustrated and angry as hell about this issue because he had repeatedly tried to get information from London and Washington on this UFO matter. And every time he tried, he got a cold response. London and Washington would send shape nothing on the UFO issue. We were to find out later that it was a result of there being an enormous French spy ring in place in Paris at that time, which many of you can read about if you're interested in reading Leon Uris's very excellent book titled Topaz. The book is based upon truth. It's kind of mildly fictionalized, but it's a true story based on true events of the Columbine spy ring that existed in Paris at that time. And Topaz was made into an excellent film, by the way, so it may be still available on the stands if you wanted to borrow or rent it. But it's all true. And because of the Columbine Topaz spy ring in Paris, London and Washington would send Sir Thomas nothing on the UFO issue. Well, it was damn frustrating. Here we are facing the Soviets down over the Warsaw Pact and over the Iron Curtain there, looking at each other, hands on the triggers. And Sir Thomas finally said, I've had enough. We're going to do our own in-house study. We're going to establish a military research plan here inside of SHAPE and try to determine what the hell's going on here. Who are they? Why are they here? Where are they from? And what do they want? This is after we long determined that the Soviets were not involved and that we knew we weren't involved. And we were really, frankly, curious. Who the hell was involved? Now, but remember back, this was in the 60s. We've learned a lot since then. But back then, we didn't know too much. Our own American government knew quite a bit, but it wasn't sharing with anybody back then. So when Sir Thomas established the study, it was based finally on an incident that occurred on the 2nd of February 1961, where roughly 50 of these objects flew over in formation at a high rate of speed, obviously under intelligent control, did the same damn thing. The Soviets went on red alert. They closed all of the borders in Berlin. We went on red alert. Everybody responded, and it was one of those moments. I'm tempted so often to use old military terms, and I refuse to do that because there are the ladies in the room. But there were tense and very tight times, particularly at 3 o'clock in the morning in the Shape War Room. When the teletypes were going off, the phones were all ringing, all hell was breaking loose all over Central Europe, and we thought the war had begun. Well, in 1961, Sir Thomas established this study. They named it an assessment. An assessment. They gave it a subtitle of an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. It later became known as the assessment. And they finally finished the study and published it in 1964 while I was there. And it was a mind-boggling and earth-shaking experience for me to see this and to read it, to be involved with it, and considering the implications in this conclusion, or these conclusions, for the human race and the planet Earth. I'm not exaggerating to tell you that from that moment on, my life was never, ever quite the same. And I think as I give you some of the findings, you'll understand. I was a young, crew-cut, hotshot master sergeant in a choice assignment. In those years, I thought I knew everything. And you all remember when you're that young, you think you do know everything. And when I got a hold of this thing, and I got a chance to read it, I couldn't put it down. I literally could not walk away from it, because every time I was on duty in shock, I would take it out of the vault and read it and study it and damn near memorize it. And only by the grace of God did I avoid going to jail, because once or twice I was even tempted to make some copies and take them with me. And I'm glad I didn't do that, because if I had, I would now be serving time in Fort Leavenworth at the Army Disciplinary Barracks. But I did read it, I did memorize portions of it, and I did make some notes. And I want to share with you this afternoon some of the conclusions of this SHAPE study, which took 3 years, an enormous amount of money. It involved some of the finest minds in Europe. They had gone to scholars, Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne. They'd gone to the finest universities in Denmark, Italy, Germany. They'd gone to Tübingen University, which has an ancient reputation for excellence in theological studies. And this document, which was finally published in 15 copies only, at a cosmic top-secret clearance level, had the final conclusions here. Let me share with you. The document was roughly 1.5 inches thick. There was about 265 pages. The document was supported by approximately 8 inches of what we call annexes or appendices. There were 10 of those annexes, appendices, supporting this document. There was one on radar and electromagnetic effects. There was an annex on optical and light analysis. There was an annex on photographic and holographic analysis. There was one on historical research and evidence. An annex on metallurgical and technical analysis. There was an annex on atmospheric physics and meteorological studies. There was one on biological analysis and autopsies. A very important one on sociological studies and implications. An annex on psychological studies and mass effect and impact. And the last, not least, and in my own personal view, probably the single most important appendices or annex to this study of all, were the theological implications and the worldwide implications of this study. And I believe that to be probably the most important one, beyond the hardware, beyond the hard science, and I'll explain to you why. And I'll explain to you why I see the implications for that part of it as one reason why they have kept the lid on this secret for so long and are still sitting on top of it. Essentially, basically, is that some people have concluded that you, the American people, we, the citizens of this small planet, are simply not strong enough or bright enough or courageous enough to deal with the facts. Someone has decided that we really shouldn't be told. I quote to you this statement that was made a few years ago by one of the top people at the Central Intelligence Agency, which was quoted in the Washington Post, where he said, "If we're lying to you, it's for your own good." Now I ask you, how many of you are willing to take that? How many of you guys are willing to sit there and take crap like that? I'm not. I'm paying their bills. We're paying their salaries. And the time has come for us to stand up and say, not only no, but hell no. It's over. We're going to find out one way or the other. Now, what did this 3-year study and all of the money and all of this investigation and all of this research really lead to? When they published it in 1964, I said there was only 15 copies. Copy number 1 went to the Secretary General of NATO. Copy number 2 went to General Lyman Lemnitzer, who was the Supreme Allied Commander. Copy number 3 was assigned to the Shock Operations Center, and that's the one I got a chance to read over and over and over again. The other copies were distributed throughout the military headquarters to major military commanders from the various nations. There were copies in French and German and in English. But what was this document that stirred so much up there in shape in 1964? Let me tell you basically what the major conclusions were. Number 1, and this is a real grabber. The planet Earth, and apparently the entire human race, is and has been the subject of an extensive, intensive, and massive survey and examination by several, remember, several, extraterrestrial high-technology civilizations. And this survey has been extremely thorough and detailed. That almost blows you out of your chair right there. Number 2, these civilizations have demonstrated not only high intelligence, but an extremely advanced technology that may possibly be hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond our own. Evidence collected and studied by this report indicates that there is apparently some kind of a process or a plan unfolding. They, whoever they are, continually demonstrate that the development of some kind of program is underway. And over the last 40 years, you can see this developing. You can see this process taking place. It's very clear for those of us who spent most of our lives looking at it. Evidence in this report leads to the conclusion that this survey or program has been going on for a very long time, possibly several thousand years. My personal view is it's been going on a lot longer than that, and I'll explain to you why I feel that. Military intelligence analysis have concluded there did not appear to be a major military threat involved. The conclusions seem to indicate that if they were either malevolent or hostile, that there was absolutely nothing that we could do at that time. And I have to tell you very honestly, there's absolutely nothing we can do at this time. SHAPE and NATO policy dictates that an ongoing study continues by the various military committees and that as many resources as possible by the major powers be committed to this matter. The entire subject is considered to be of the highest importance and extremely sensitive, and that this committee recommends that the highest level of classification be placed upon this matter, if approved by SACEUR, to be above top secret, above cosmic top secret, which is what they did. Well, that's what turned this young crew cut head around. I guess I really grew up at that time. Somehow, all of the fun and games that I had enjoyed over the years, and in the infantry, if any of you have ever been into it, we had our own fun and games. We drank too much. We caroused a bit. Particularly in combat situations, we had ways of unwinding. I developed a closeness with a lot of friends over those years, and I lost a lot of those friends over those years. But I never very seriously after this study, laughed very much. I was completely changed in that my total view of the world had changed. My concept of myself and my awareness and concept of my life changed. It made such a difference on me that when my wife remarked about it, she said, something's wrong. She says, you're even different than you were when you came back from Korea. And that's true. And the change in my life, I'm sorry to have to tell you, led to the dissolution of my first marriage. I was never the same. The world did not seem quite the same to me. All of the fun and games that I had enjoyed with my friends over the years kind of took their place in the past. And I guess at that point, for the first time in my life, I really matured and grew up. And I owe that to this study. Now, the findings of the shape assessment made a big difference in my life, but it was a tiny part of it in the sense that most of what I have learned and concluded over the last 30 years as a result of my own individual studies that I've added to considerably over the years beyond the military findings. The military findings, by the way, and I have to share this with you before it slips away. As you can probably tell, I do not deliver this from a prepared presentation. I don't have a prepared presentation. I'm winging this. So if I jump around a bit, bear with me, because there are things I need to talk to you about and share with you that I may not have exactly in front of me. When the study was concluded in 1964, they knew at that time, they had concluded at that time, that there were roughly 4 of these advanced extraterrestrial high-technology civilizations that were interrelating with us. The most exciting part of that, you'll notice that I begin to perspire a bit when I'm talking about highly classified things and realizing that the military police could be running through the back door at any moment. But I'm too damned old to worry about it. If they want to put me in jail, that's fine. I challenge them to put me in jail, because then we'll have a trial and I can subpoena all of the evidence. But they concluded in '64 that there were 4 of these groups. Now, I have learned since from people who are in the inside, people I trust, that there's not only 4, there may be more than a dozen, and some estimates that there could run as many as 100 different groups. And Wendell Stevens' research concludes with that same finding, that we could be dealing with high-tech extraterrestrial intelligences in the hundreds of different kinds of people from different places. I'm not sure we'll ever know. Well, perhaps in the years ahead we will. But the most exciting thing and the most threatening thing to the military commanders of SHAPE at that time that really got to them, really stimulated their paranoia. And as you all know, if you were in the military, paranoia is the name of the game. That's how we're trained. We're trained to be paranoid, which is part of our job. But the most exciting aspect of all to me was the fact that one of these groups, one of the 4, looked exactly like we do. And I mean exactly. So much so they could put on a suit and a tie, sit next to you in a restaurant, sit right beside you in an airplane, or sit right next to you in a hall just like this, and ladies and gentlemen, you would never know. You would never know unless they wanted you to. And generally speaking, they don't want you to. But there have been a few cases where they have shared that information. But now, if you think this didn't upset the generals and the admirals in 1964, I remember over lunch one day there was a comment brought up that, my God, that means they could even be here in the NAFI cafeteria, sitting down having lunch with us, walking up and down the SHAPE corridors. Some wag said, my God, they could even be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. And some smartass who'd had a bit too much wine says they could even be wandering around in the White House. And there was a lot of forced laughter about that. But it really didn't strike them as terribly funny. The idea that there could be intelligent, humanoid, human aliens in our midst. And boy, if they had known then what we have learned since. That was only the beginning. Another thing that had been concluded, and this was a conclusion that the military people, our military, knew when I left the service in 1976. I retired at the Presidio of San Francisco in 1976 after 27 years of service. And at that time, it was quite apparent to some of our scientists and some of our researchers that we were not simply dealing with a simple extraterrestrial problem here. We weren't simply dealing with visitations from interplanetary intelligence. We were dealing with visitations from interstellar intelligence. We were probably dealing with intelligences intergalactic in nature. And the most stunning thing of all was very probably and most likely that some of these advanced intelligences were literally multidimensional in their origins. And some of them apparently, and we had evidence to support this, literally could indeed travel in time. Now, if you think that wasn't a hair raiser, a blockbuster for some of our military planners, it was really getting their attention. Not only are we dealing with interstellar, intergalactic, but we're dealing with multidimensional beings who apparently can indeed travel in time. And a little later on this afternoon, you're going to be honored by a presentation of one of the top people in his field who I greatly admire, who's going to explain to you that some of this is not off the wall, far off kind of science. This is real. This is not only practicable, but it's probably happening right now. So I've made that point. And I have to honestly tell you that in my studies for the last 30 years, to try to get some kind of an overview, to figure out what really is going on here, it began to dawn on me that there was no single scientific discipline that was applicable here. You couldn't just look at this from the hardware. You couldn't look at it from atmospheric physics. You couldn't look at it from a single discipline. And as you know, most of our great scientists are very well focused in their field on a single discipline. And that's the field they know, that's the understanding they have, that's the research they've done. And so many of them don't look around and look at some of the other disciplines. Well, it dawned on me as a student of history that I had to look at this a bit differently if I was going to make any sense out of it at all. And as Raimundo said in my introduction, I have put together what I like to call a synthesis. Over the years, I have combined history, philosophy, theology, literature, science, anthropology, geology, mythology. And I feel that I have at least begun to reach something in the way of an answer as to what's taking place and what's going on here. And I'm not taking a great sense of pride in this, but I feel that not too many other people have done that. To look at it from all of those various separate disciplines. It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. It's like putting a mosaic together, or again, after you've dropped it, and the bits and pieces are all over the floor. It's very painstaking, it takes time, but eventually, slowly, you put these little bits and pieces together, you put the parts of the jigsaw puzzle together, and you begin to get a picture. And now I'm going to share with you what I have concluded seems to be happening. Now I want you to understand something else here. I am not a prophet, I am not a preacher, I'm not proselytizing, and I don't want any of you people to leave the room this afternoon believing anything I have said simply because I said it. That would not be what I wanted to accomplish. I want you to leave the room hopefully with a heightened sense of curiosity, a heightened interest, and enough curiosity to go out there and inform yourselves. Don't take my word for it. Don't let the government con you or lie to you. There's information there that is available. Some of the finest information in the world is available. And I think my wife Cecilia has probably prepared a couple of handouts on suggested, recommended reading lists. And those are simply books that I have looked at and concluded are worth looking at, are worth reading. So take some of those reading lists with you, and if you read nothing else, these things are always beyond me. If you read nothing else, read Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. Tim is a friend of mine, and I have a great admiration for him. And it's rather thick, but it's the one single book that each and every one of you need to read. And if you haven't, you must do so. And it'll give you not only the history, past history, but current history, and it's material in there that is really out of this world. So read Tim Good's book, Above Top Secret, and you're well on your way. Now, as I have said in my notes, what the hell is really happening? The big approach has been for years, who are they? What are they? Where are they from? And why are they here? Well, I have to tell you that that has now become secondary in my research. I'm still curious and I'm still interested. But that research has led me into what I call the bottom line of all bottom lines. And that is, who are we? Why are we here? And where are we going? And that's the most important thing of all. And this UFO research and all of the hardware and all of the alien connections pale into insignificance when you start and to begin to look at who we are and why we're here and where we're going, and the fact that we are a part of an absolutely infinite, incredible, magnificent plan. And none of us is an accident. Not one single one of us is an accident. We're all supposed to be here. We all have a purpose. We all have a meaning. There's a reason for us to be here. And there's also a reason why we are now slowly beginning to come together, to work with each other and support each other, to bring out the truth in this matter. Well, that's easy to say. What is the truth? I remember years ago, one of my favorite writers was Hemingway. And then I think it was his classic Rivers in the Stream, Islands in the Stream. One of the heroes asks the question is, what is truth? And the old codger, you've been reading my mind, thank you. The hero of the story says, it's all true. It's all true. So I would like for you to keep that in mind. And let me tell you what I think is the truth. To sum up rather briefly, if I can, I've never summed up very much in my life briefly, but I'll try. I have concluded, after all of these years of really digging into this, through all of those various disciplines, one of my great interests in life is ancient history, which automatically led me into mythology, which tied in closely with theology, philosophy. But I have concluded, and this is my own conclusion, and I throw it out to you for whatever it's worth. The human race is a hybrid race. We have been placed on this planet, we have been seeded here, and we have been genetically manipulated over the eons of time, continually since the beginning of our history. And that genetic manipulation is still going on today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never been alone. We are not alone, and we have never been alone. We are members of an almost infinite, I say infinite, not really knowing quite what that word means. We are members of a vast universe filled with intelligent life. That universe is our home. We're part of it. We were born here in it. It will always be our home, and that universe is a sacred place. And we are sacred beings. And I don't want to sound like a preacher, but we have a right to be here. There's a purpose and there is a meaning to our being here. And we are going to be finding some answers to all of these questions very, very soon in a way that's going to literally shake the foundations of this planet. Which is why I think it's important for you to pay attention, inform yourselves, wake up, and don't let them lie to you anymore. We have apparently had an intimate interrelationship with several groups of advanced, intelligent, high-tech, and I say high-tech, I'm talking about technology so far beyond our own that it's literally magic to our eyes. And we've had this intimate interrelationship for hundreds of thousands of years. And some of them are the reasons we're here. And one of the things that I try to stress again and again and again happens every time. Thank you. I think that'll do it. That'll do it. Where was I? This intimate interrelationship has been more intimate than most of you would even imagine. Now, there are a lot of you in the audience who I think are probably concerned and interested and a little frightened, perhaps, of what has been known over the last few years as the abduction scenario. There are a lot of people who've been traumatized, a lot of people who've been scared half to death. There may be people in this room who have been involved in the abduction scenario. And you may be carrying some scars with you today, both inward and outward, because of things that may have happened to you. All I can tell you is that in my own studies and research and conclusions is that that's simply part of the entire program, and it should not be something that we should be terrorized by, and should not be something that we're hysterically scared half to death over. That if we can approach it with the proper view and the proper understanding of what's taking place, it'll help us deal with this. Because not only has it been happening, it's been going on for a very long time, and it's going to continue to happen. This intimate interrelationship, this continual evolving process, this continual growth of the human being, the human species, is continuous, has not stopped, and it will not stop. I must tell you that in my own view, we are changing, you and I, all of us here, in ways you don't even understand. Not only is your imagination and your mind and your spirit and your thoughts undergoing incredibly complicated expansions and developments, but your physical body is changing even as you sit in this room. You're changing at a molecular level. It's happening now. And the reason I have to stress this is because what we are becoming is going to be a different species. And I'm trying to explain this to you because it's going to be a worldwide shock to most of the human race that in a few short years, this planet, we, the human race, what we would call Cro-Magnon, are going to be so different from what we are today. We're going to be so far beyond Cro-Magnon that we as Cro-Magnons were beyond poor old Neanderthal. And we look back over what we know of him and we look at those beetle brows and those big massive shoulders and we kind of think of him perhaps as more of an animal than a human, which I don't think is really fair. He was a lot brighter than we ever gave him credit for because he did some absolutely beautiful cave paintings on the walls in Spain and southern France. And an animal is not capable of painting pictures like that. We also learned that he had a great spirit and soul because when he lost someone he loved, we've learned that Neanderthal would bury his wife and a baby and put a tiny bouquet of flowers in the grave with them. So there is a connection between us and them. And they weren't as far beyond us as they would imagine. But what I want you to understand more than anything else is that you are changing into a new race, a new species that will be so far beyond what we are here now than we are beyond Neanderthal. And that's going to happen. It's part of the program, it's part of the plan, it's part of the growth. And what it's going to be doing, it's preparing us to stand up, grow up, start behaving as adults, as a race, and hopefully go out there and take our place with this infinite civilization, these vast, vast civilizations of life out there. A door is being opened for us. You can see it every day if you pay attention. You can see it in our flights to the moon. You can see it in our discoveries in science. You can see it in our new genetic discoveries. Every day we're learning more and more, and we're changing right in front of our own eyes. And a door has been opened and is being opened for us, and we have to go through that door as one people, from one planet with one future. Or, ladies and gentlemen, we may not go at all. The time has come, and we are being challenged beyond any challenge we've ever faced before. And I, for one, want us to go through that door, because I know what lies beyond that door. And if you think that you have wild dreams, you haven't thought of anything yet compared to what the future will be for the human race. I'm a pessimist in some areas, but I'm an optimist about the future of the human race. There's so much to talk about, and I don't really know how to wrap it up and bring it all together here. Before we take our step through that door, there are some terrible things that are going to take place on this planet, I'm afraid. There are going to be some rather major cataclysmic changes on the planet. Most of these things are probably cyclic. They're natural. They do happen in cycles over the eons of time. The tectonic plates shift, the volcanoes erupt, the earthquakes take place. The earth is a constant change of growth and change and development itself, because the earth itself is alive. So there are going to be some things happening in the next few short years, and they've already begun. All you have to do is read the papers, pay attention. Some of them are pretty terrible. And ladies and gentlemen, you ain't seen nothing yet. When the ring of fire erupts and the volcanoes all begin to go, and the earthquakes really begin to happen, and this little burp in California just a few weeks ago was just a burp. Mount St. Helens was a burp. Now when Mother Earth hiccups and coughs, then we will really pay attention. And it's going to be pretty difficult. It's going to be horrendous, frankly. But I ask you not to be frightened. Don't lose your sense of strength and courage, because it's all going to come out all right. Because the human being, you, I, we are not what we see sitting here in this room. And if I've learned anything over the last 30 years, it is that we are immortal beings who happen to have temporary bodies. We are not bodies with souls, we are souls with bodies. And this little piece of whatever, when it's over, we've used it up, we've worn it out, and I've been well on my way to wearing this one out. We lay it down, we cast it aside, and we go on. And life goes on forever. So whatever happens in the years ahead, the difficulties you're going to encounter, bear that in mind, that you are an immortal being, and that every great religious teacher from the beginning of our recorded history has told us the same basic story. And every great religious teacher, and I say all of them, not only Jesus of Nazareth, not only Zoroaster, not only Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad, all of them have had the same basic source. And they have come to us from this infinite civilization of life out there, slowly, gently trying in the best way they could to teach us to grow up. Well, the time has come. We have to grow up. We have no other choice. Some of the stuff that's going on in Yugoslavia today, the stuff that's going on in Lebanon, my God, I could go on for 15 minutes and talk about the heartbreak, the bloodshed, and the savagery, where human beings are still butchering each other out there in 1994, for God's sake. That has got to stop. We have got to realize that we, the human race, are all one single form of life. I studied history over the years, and it became apparent to me some years ago that in the tapestry of human experience, and this incredibly beautiful tapestry with all of the colors, going back from the beginning of our recorded history, there is a single golden thread running throughout that entire tapestry that ties us and links us all together. And what I have concluded, and I know most of you in this room have reached the same conclusion or you wouldn't be here, is it doesn't matter what church you go to. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what your ethnic background is. Ladies and gentlemen, that crap does not matter. And if we're going to be capable of going through the door that's being opened for us, as I said, we're going to have to go through as one people and one planet with one future. Or so help me God, we may not be allowed to go at all. And we're running out of time. And I call upon each and every one of you to inform yourselves. Join this little crusade or whatever you wish to call it. Spread a little knowledge and a little light. Spread some hope around among your friends and family. Because this world needs a little hope. It needs some light. It needs some understanding. It needs some confidence that there will be a tomorrow. I was in Budapest a year or so ago, and a young mother came up to me with a little baby. And this is a true story. This is not something that I'm making up for you. And I had more or less presented the same kind of thing. And she asked me, she says, do you really think that we have a future? She'd come out of all those years under the communist yoke. Hungary had just recently become independent from the communist masters. And she was scared literally to death that there might not be a tomorrow. And she held that little dude in her arm and she says, will he live to grow up and see something? And I says, in my view, yes, he will indeed. He will inherit a world that you can only begin to dream about. So I tried to leave her with a little bit of hope, and I'm going to try to leave you with this portion of my presentation with a little bit of hope by quoting for you one of the finest, one of the greatest authors I have always admired, and that's Count Leo Tolstoy. Having spoken about the cataclysms, having spoken about the earth changes, the quakes, the volcanoes, I'm talking about widespread mass insurrections, panic, famines, floods, all of it. Bear this in mind, as Leo Tolstoy repeatedly said again and again and again. There is something in the human spirit that will survive and will prevail. There is a light that will not go out no matter how dark the world becomes. And I have concluded that is true. I remember that the carpenter from Galilee said basically the same thing. Krishna said basically the same thing. It's in the Quran. It's in the Zend-Avesta, the great book of the Zoroastrians. It's all there. You are immortal beings, and there is a light within you that will not go out, no matter how dark the world becomes. And if you take nothing else with you this afternoon, please, in the name of God, take that with you. And I thank you. I need some help here from some of the guys. How are we doing on time?
35 minutes. You want to do 35 minutes with the slides?
Yes, I want to put on a few slides. I think it's important. Okay. Ken, were we able to work out something on the lights? You think it'll be all right? Oh, okay. Good, I thank you.
make a brief announcement?
Yes?
I just wanted to let you know that the obvious, that we are running a little bit late. So the question and answer period is pushed into the 5 o'clock hour. And if you wish to stay, we don't have to be out of this hall until 6. So if you have questions and would like to stay for the Q&A period, in order to give Mr. Froning the appropriate amount of time for his presentation, we really need to go until 5 o'clock or 5:15. So I invite you to stay. Give me your feedback. I'm willing to take a show of hands. Yes? All right. Okay. So be it. Thank you.
First of all, I'm not letting you out the door till David Froning has spoken. You're not leaving until you hear this gentleman, because he's very, very special. I neglected to tell you about how in the world did I get involved in this latest concept through the UFO matter, and I want you to understand that in my view, the UFO matter is simply a triggering mechanism. It's a means of getting our attention. It's like the crop circles. An intelligence far beyond anything we imagine is saying, wake up, guys. It's morning. It's time to stop sleeping, look around you, find out who you are and what the hell is going on. That is basically what's happening with the UFOs. They're interesting, they're hardware, some of them may not be hardware. When we're dealing with civilizations that literally travel in time, when we're dealing with technologies that can literally manipulate matter and time, think about it for a moment and realize what the future of this planet and your race is going to be. Be hopeful that your grandkids and great-grandkids will inherit something so far beyond and so beautiful that we can only barely begin to imagine it. And that every great promise from every great religious teacher in history has told us essentially the same thing. I was talking to a fundamentalist friend the other day, and we were talking about the second coming. And a lot of my religious friends have this concept, and I relate to that. And I said, yes, it is indeed going to take place, but it's not going to be anything like you imagine. It's going to be far greater and more beautiful and more incredible than you can imagine. But yes, he will be back. Now, I'd like to show you a few slides in conclusion, and maybe hopefully have a time for a few questions. Jim, would you see that that's focused for me? All right. I can't see it too well here. I like to lead off my slide presentation with some of these shots because it's important. I think it develops a sense of perspective. And I want you to look out there into your community, your neighborhood that you are a part of. And I want you to think about it. It's beautiful. I'm old enough to remember when the great lens at Mount Palomar, the 200-inch lens, was put in place many, many years ago, long before some of you were born. And I remember at the time the shock in astronomy when they looked out through the great lens of Mount Palomar, and it dawned on them that all of those lovely little pinpoints of light were not merely stars. Some of those little points of light were other galaxies. And they had never dreamed of that before. Now you look out there in pictures like this and you tell me if you can conceive that we are sitting out here on this little tiny planet on the edge of this third-rate little solar system here, and are we alone? No way. Now I'm going to lay some statistics on you. I hate doing this, but you should be getting used to it. Now, the statistics I'm going to share with you, nobody really can grasp except the guys who work with our national budget. But I want to share some statistics with you. About 17 years ago, NASA brought together some of the world's top astronomers for a 2-week seminar, and their question was roughly, how many suns are there in our galaxy? And if you have any rough idea, they asked further, how many galaxies roughly give or take a few 100,000, in the known universe. And the results were absolutely astounding. The scientists, not terribly conservative here, said roughly, give or take a few billion. I'm reminded of, what is it, the old senator who says you a billion here and a billion there, and the first thing you're talking about real money. We're talking about some real exciting truths here. They concluded, and this is the latest estimate that I've heard, that there are roughly 400 billion stars in our galaxy. And this is a neighboring galaxy. This is in a catalog known as M31. It's the great spiral galaxy in Andromeda. And I show it to you because our galaxy is shaped very much like that. If we were way out there somewhere, looking back on our own home galaxy, and we wanted to find the planet Earth, we would probably have to look somewhere out here, because that's where our solar system and our little sun is in relationship to the rest of this vast galaxy we're a part of. But they estimated there are 400 billion stars in our galaxy, and there are roughly 400 billion galaxies in the known universe. And then, if that weren't exciting enough, I've got to spring this on you. This is a lot of fun. I love doing this, particularly to astronomers. The University of Arizona astronomers, just recently, Thursday, January the 13th, 1994, they have discovered 516 additional previously unknown galaxies. So just add that to the existing 400 billion. And what will next week bring? What will the Hubble really begin to show us? But I love showing these pictures because they do develop a sense of perspective, and I think it's important to understand who we are, where we are, and why we are. Now that many of you are familiar with, those are the lovely ladies, the Pleiades, the seven sisters. And if the evidence is true, there's evidence, overwhelming evidence, that some of our friends, some of our family, some of our cousins literally come from a star, from a planet going around one of those stars. I don't have any first-hand knowledge on this, but I'm convinced that it's probably so. Our ancient ancestors knew things about the Pleiades that we're only just now beginning to learn. And here we are, this little tiny, beautiful little place out there, blue and green, that we literally have been trashing for the last couple of thousand years. And we've got to stop that. Every one of our astronomers or astronauts who've gone out to the moon and looked back and saw this have had a deep spiritual kind of feeling overwhelm them. An awareness of how tiny and how beautiful that is, and how the fact that that is the home of the human race, and that we have got to start taking better care of it. We have to start loving that beautiful lady and giving back to her what she's given to us. And the time has come for us to stop trashing her, raping and pillaging and digging and gouging. And we have to learn to live on her in peace with each other, like some of our American Indian and some of our more ancient peoples have learned a long time ago. Now, I briefly want to show you just a few paintings from some of the great museums. And the reason I throw these out, I hope that's focused fairly well.
Can we turn the lights off just a second and then flip them back on?
Can we cut back on the lights just a little? Anyhow, what I'm showing you here is that in many ancient religious paintings, Renaissance, Middle Ages, all kinds of paintings all over the world, you'll find that they're filled with what I call lenticular clouds. Now, some of these lenticular clouds are beautiful. They're circular, disc-shaped clouds with little domes on top. And the reason I bring that to your attention is not to tell you that all lenticular clouds are UFOs, but I'm trying to point out to you that not all lenticular clouds are clouds. And I got a couple of shots, I think, that'll prove that to you. But why do we find again and again this sort of thing in religious paintings? Did our ancestors know something we didn't? Look here. Look here. Is it just by accident that they're putting these lovely lenticular clouds in these religious paintings? Well, I've got a conclusion here. This is, by the way, is a lovely lenticular cloud that was photographed in the Soviet Union not too long ago that was seen to fly away at a high rate of speed. So the point I'm trying to make is I'm not trying to convince you that all lenticular clouds are UFOs. I'm simply saying the next time you see one, look at it a little more carefully. Another lenticular cloud. This was in Central Europe. That also held together and departed at a relatively high rate of speed. Now, why am I talking about lenticular clouds? The next little series of pictures were taken a number of years ago at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, by an Army sergeant who was undergoing a training program. He and his friends were out in the fields going through some regular training. Fort Belvoir is in Virginia, I believe. The sergeant happened to have a camera with him. And this strange object appeared over this building here. And everybody looked at it and they all said, "What the hell is that?" And then things began to happen. This object began to change and they began taking pictures of it as it did change. And so help me, it's turning itself into a lenticular cloud. Now, I'm convinced there was an intelligence in there, and I'm convinced that they were doing this just to show this off to these guys and say, "Hey, pay attention. What do you think of this?" If you could lower that just a bit, Jim, so we can get all of it in. And this lenticular cloud departed Fort Belvoir at a rather high rate of speed. 7,000 miles away, and 15 years later, that was photographed in Denmark. Another lovely lenticular cloud. It also flew away at a rather high clip. So I'm just simply doing this to get your attention, and I'm teasing you a little bit, telling you that the next time you see lenticular clouds, look them over a little more carefully. Now, here's a lovely painting that hangs on the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. It was painted by one of the greater Renaissance artists of the time, a friar by the name of Filippo Lippi. And this painting that he spent a lot of his life working on is supposed to be St. John and the baby Jesus here. And of course, here's Mary, the Madonna. But I want to call your attention to this object over the Madonna's shoulder, which is blown up here, a little larger. Now, this is 15th century. Now, here's a blow-up. If we could bring that down just a wee bit. Down here we have an old gentleman with his hand up to his eyes, peering up, and at his feet is a dog barking. Now, the reason I call this object to your attention, and this is no accident that's in this painting, this is an exact replica of an object that many of you who've studied UFOs may have read about a few years ago. At Bonai, New Guinea, a UFO appeared and hovered over the beach for about an hour and a half, and the Reverend Gill and all of the students at the Bonai mission in New Guinea rushed out and watched this object hover over the beach. The kids got so excited that they began jumping up and down and yelling and waving. And then, lo and behold, they noticed that there were guys, humans, up on top of this disc, walking around on what appeared to be a deck. And when the kids were dancing and singing and yelling and waving, the guys up there waved back, looked over the side and waved back. Now, I just throw this out as a teaser. This painting was done over 400 years ago. This ship was seen over Bonai, New Guinea about 30 years ago. Actually less. Another little interesting, what old Ivan Sanderson used to call an oopart. And I loved Sanderson. He was a great man, very open-minded, very intelligent. Ooparts are out-of-place artifacts. This little dude is over 1,000 years old. It's made out of clay, and it was an attempt by an Indian, I believe in Colombia, over 1,000 years ago to describe what he was looking at here. And this, in almost anybody's imagination, is a spacesuit. Here's another one. This Indian was a pretty decent artist, but he tried to convey to the people what he had seen. 1,000 years later, we look at that and we look at it in a different eye. Now, you're familiar with these. These are the classic shapes of most UFOs over the last 40, 50 years. Matter of fact, some of these shapes go back a lot longer than 40 to 50 years. Some of these shapes go back several 100,000 years. But I want you to look at them. I know most of them are familiar to you. It's quite a catalog. But I want you to pay attention to that one right there for a reason. A couple of slides later, I want you to bear in mind the shape of that one. Now here are cave paintings from southern France and northern Spain. They've estimated that these are at the very least 40,000 years old. And some of them could be as old as 60,000 years. But I want you to look at a couple of things on here. Look at that. Look up here. Look at this one. Actually, look at all of them here. Now, interestingly enough, the French, being great scholars, and I admire their work, have cataloged some of these cave paintings, and they've published these catalogs of what they have found in these caves. And I'll go back briefly, calling your attention to this here. And here it is. What do you suppose those dots behind that disc are to represent? Well, in my opinion, it represents that it was moving. And so here we have probably some old Neanderthal trying to communicate something that he had seen. But look at these shapes. They're right out of the modern catalogs. You remember some of the stuff Wendell showed you here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this stuff is 40,000 years old. There's that one again. The artist is conveying that that was moving, I am assuming, at a rather smart speed from left to right. It's a classic disc with the dome on top. And look at this one. I don't know what to make of this. It's probably some kind of a person, an individual in a spacesuit of some kind, I suspect. But they've cataloged them all, and it's pretty impressive. If you look along the bottom row here under Catalog C, you'll see that these all apparently represent landed discs, UFOs on the ground, on their legs, which have been seen and photographed continually over the years. Now, this is a wooden painting from Egypt. It was on the side of a sarcophagus. And they've dated it roughly First Dynasty, which means it goes back probably about 2,800 years BC. And in the descriptions, the hieroglyphic descriptions of this particular object, they called it the chest of Osiris. Osiris being one of the great creator gods of the ancient Egyptians. Well, I looked at it and I saw these little red things on the back, and I looked at this little and I thought, wait a minute, let's turn that right side up. And this is the chest of Osiris, roughly 2,800 years before Christ. And to me, it's a classic example of a little runabout. There's the cabin. Here's the front end. There very well may be an intake of some kind here. But to me, these are jets. And I think the Egyptian artist was quite clear in what he was trying to communicate. Now, I throw these out also as ooparts to tell you that, think about it. Don't be convinced from what I'm trying to tell you, but give it some thought. Another interesting OOP art, Ivan Sanderson would have loved this. It's a cave painting found near the Chinese-Russian border in an area called Fergana. This object, this guy's got some stuff in his hand. It looks like a gloved gauntlet here. He's holding a circular plate of some kind. Looks like there's some apparatus here. This very well may be a dome or a face piece or an airhead pocket of some kind. And possibly this surrealistic illusion here may be the result of reflection through that plastic. But look at this thing. And look at this. And then look at this little dude down here with the antenna on his helmet. Now this was estimated to be well over 1,000 years old. Now looking at this plate that this guy's holding with his astronaut's glove. Oh, before we get on to that. These are some classic pictures from the APRO files going back many, many years. These are pictures of the UFO that hovered over the Weineke Reservoir in New Jersey a number of years ago. And it's exciting because this UFO hovered over the reservoir for about an hour and a half, so much so that roughly 300 people stopped on a busy road, got out of their cars, caused one hell of a traffic jam, and they stood and watched this object hovering over the reservoir for some time. Well, the traffic jam attracted the cops, and the cops showed up, and they were there, and they saw it too. And a whole bunch of pictures were taken. But what's interesting about the object here is that the object appeared to lower slowly a beam of light from the bottom of the object down toward the surface of the frozen reservoir. Now this is the famous Weineke Reservoir in New Jersey, and hundreds of people had seen this actually happen. Everybody got excited because that beam of light, or whatever it is, did not flash down immediately like you and I would flash on a spotlight. That beam came down slowly, down onto the surface of the reservoir. And when they retracted it, it went up slowly. What do you make of that? I don't know. Scientists are having a hell of a time trying to figure that one out. Here's another picture. That's the beam of light right there. Came down from the ship, hit the surface of the reservoir, and when the ship finally left, they found a large circular melted place in the ice on the Weineke Reservoir. That light, for some way and some reason, melted a great circular hole in the water, in the ice. Now, there are a lot of other pictures here, and I don't know, I think we're running a little out of time, and I certainly want to give you time for a question or two, and I certainly want to get you ready for David Froning, who is well worth waiting for and listening for. Most of the other shots I have are simply photos, and you've seen some of the finest Wendell had. So by just showing you some more of the ones I have, it wouldn't really accomplish very much. So if you turn off the projector and get on the lights, I would like to do some wrapping up here. We have some lights? Oh, there. Oh, okay. Yeah, take it off. Take the tray off, Jim. Well, I've touched on a lot of stuff in a very short time. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to tell you what a joy it is for me to be here and share with people like yourselves who have open minds, who are willing to learn. There's so damn much I could share. I must leave a couple of quotes with you here. Archie Ray, the professor of astronomy at the University of Glasgow some years back, said, and I want you to remember this, "A true scientist goes where the evidence leads him, even if it's a place he doesn't particularly want to go." A true scientist. Now, I want you to bear in mind that Archie Ray is a true scientist. I will tell you a little story in closing that is true. A number of years ago, Alan Hynek was attending a conference in, I believe, in Canada, British Columbia, I believe in Victoria. There were roughly 200 astronomers present at this particular conference. During the time they were all in there having cocktails and chatting, someone ran into the midst of the room, and Alan Hynek was there. And someone says, "My God, you've all got to come out and look. There's something up there, something looked like a UFO, and it's not far above the hotel here, and it's hovering there." Alan Hynek was amazed. Not one scientist, not one astronomer took the trouble to go out and look. All they did was look at each other, snicker, and giggle. And ladies and gentlemen, that's part of our problem here today. In closing, I want to tell you that you're on the edge of a major shift in worldview, what they call a paradigm shift. The next few short years are going to bring about some changes in your life, in your world, that are going to turn it upside down, and nothing ever will ever be the same. But I want you to be prepared for it, because out of the wreckage and the ruins of this old world, we're going to build something much better and more beautiful than what we've had. And I want to thank you all, and God bless all of you, and thank you for coming. Have I got a minute or two for a couple of questions?
We have about 4 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Now, what kind of suggestions do you have for individuals to prepare for and survive these world changes that are coming up?
That's a difficult question, and I'll be frank with you, I don't have any real glib answer for you. After spending the last 14 years of my life as an emergency services plans and operations officer, disaster planner, emergency response, I can say to you that it would make just damn good sense for each and every one of you to reasonably stock in your homes a couple of weeks' supply of food and some water. And I would say that to you whether it's a flood, an earthquake, whatever. Hurricanes, it doesn't matter. Simply be able to get by on your own for a couple of weeks or longer if you can. The other thing is you're going to find out that when some of this begins to happen, that don't depend on electricity. You won't got it. It won't be there. So I could suggest candles, kerosene lamps. It's the sort of thing that your grandparents and great-grandparents used to do when they were living on the prairies, when they were moving across the country, when it was Indian country. Simply plan a little bit. Put in a small Red Cross kit, little first aid. Water and food and some kind of source of lighting would make good sense. Other than that, the big shock, the terrible shock, is not going to be the earth changes themselves. It's going to be the shift in consciousness, where hundreds of thousands of millions of people are going to realize for the first time the blunt truth that they are literally not alone and never have been. And your government has never, ever begun to prepare you for that. And that's going to happen. So you're doing what I would recommend that you do. Inform yourselves. Read, learn, keep an open mind. And just pray to God, because I'm not trying to be a preacher here again, but I speak to God regularly, as my wife said, and she listens. Gentleman in the back. I'm sorry, sir. Yes, I have read Alternative 3. I've seen the video and read the book. I have some misgivings about the whole story. But I will tell you this, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, and most of your people in government, particularly NASA, knows this too, that there is indeed life on Mars, and that there is an intelligent life on Mars, and there is apparently a civilization on Mars. And we've known this for some time. Now, whether it's something we've been involved with, as Alternative 3 has said, or whether it's something that someone else has placed there, I don't know. But there may be some truth in Alternative 3, and that, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the idea that our governments, yours and mine and the Soviets and the British, some years ago concluded that life on the planet Earth was not going to be rosy and fun in the years ahead. And that all together they established a program where they went out and put colonies on Mars. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not. I'm suspicious enough to think that there may be some kernel of truth there, but I can't tell you. So don't take my word for it. It's an interesting book to read. It's an interesting video to look at. So think for yourself. Open your minds. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is so intriguing, but could you elaborate a little bit on what you know that the human beings will be like after the Earth changes and moving into this new evolutionary phase?
Well, look around.
Well, you said we will be changed a lot.
Yes, we will, but most of it is going to be inner. I'm sure that our descendants, 100,000 years from now, will look significantly different than we do. We know that we are changing continually. I suspect that our heads are getting larger. We're losing some hair, some of us faster than others. The race will evolve and change in many ways, but the big changes I'm talking about are not going to be necessarily visible. I'm sure the human beings will be taller, probably healthier, but it's going to be an inner kind of thing. It's going to be here and here, mostly. And there's where the big difference will be. And it's happening right now. And I look out here and I see light coming out of eyes, and I know that it's taking place even as I talk to you. And you know it too. It's going to happen inside more than anything else. One last question. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Well, you speak about the advanced technology these aliens have. I'm more concerned about the advanced technology that our own secret government has, like Preston Nichols and Al Bueller will come forward talking about time travel with our own secret government. And we have Robert Lazar coming forward with Area 51, where we have anti-gravity ships that our secret government has. So what can you say about that?
Well, briefly, and I'll try to be brief here, I want to tell you what I know as compared to what I suspect. I know that your government, in its infinite wisdom, developed a sustaining controlled fusion reaction at a government laboratory in the Southwest over 8 years ago. And so all of this garbage you hear about, and all this running around and yelling and money being changed hands, and all this talk about the super collider, which has been canceled, I'm told, in Texas, we have a sustained controlled fusion system. Now, for those of you who know what fusion is as compared to fission, you know that it's unlimited power, clean, unlimited, cheap power, literally forever. And your government has that. Now, it'll be a while before they tell you, because we don't want the oil industries to all collapse around our knees, because that would bring around a collapse of the automobile industry, and that would bring around the collapse of the steel industry, and the whole damn thing would collapse. So I understand the hesitancy among strategic planners to let some of this out. But I will tell you in conclusion, yes, we do have anti-gravity ships, and we're flying them. And some of them we've made, back engineered from some of the retrievals, and some of them have been given to us. And that is a fact. And that's one of the biggest secrets of all, and they don't want you to know that yet. But you're going to have to find out eventually. Because as Lincoln said, you cannot lie to all of the people all of the time, and they've tried it, and it's not working. So in closing, God bless all of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.